All right, so today we're going to cover the three major drivers of gut dysfunction. Now, why does gut dysfunction even matter? Well, obviously, if you're experiencing digestive discomfort after meals, maybe you have bloating, you have reflux, constipation, diarrhea, a combination of all of them, or you've been labeled as having IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, or maybe even in the more extreme case, inflammatory bowel disease, that's an obvious reason to care about gut dysfunction. The second reason is actually not related to the gut whatsoever. But you have to understand that what happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. That means if you're experiencing unexplained brain fog, fatigue, low mood, low energy, low motivation, and you've gone to your doctor, you've gotten a routine lab panel, and they haven't really found anything, oftentimes it can be starting in the gut. And so we want to look for these three main drivers of gut dysfunction, which can actually leach in and affect the rest of your body, including your brain, your productivity, your energy levels, how you show up at work, how you show up at home. So the first one is intestinal permeability. Most people have heard of this already. This is colloquially called leaky gut, right? It's this idea that you have an epithelial lining in your intestines, and this is one cell layer thick. That means there's literally one cell protecting you from the outside world, differentiating you from the outside world. Now, of course, with us, we're kind of a tube. We're a long donut, right? From your mouth to your anus, really just one long tube. So if there's a dysfunction there, it is not as tight as it should be. What I mean by that is normally it should look like this. It should be nice and tight, only allowing nutrients and several other components through into the bloodstream. When this becomes dysfunctional, that zipper is no longer a real zipper and it becomes sort of more like this, right? And it allows things through that should not get through. We'll talk about what some of those things are, but in general, these are some of the markers that you want to look out for to assess whether or not you have intestinal permeability of some form. Several lab tests that I help clients run and analyze are things like zonulin, oxygen exposure index. So when there is a leakiness of that gut lining, we have more oxygen exposure. In general, it should be very tight and it should not allow oxygen to get through. If there is oxygen that gets through, then you know that there's kind of like a leak in your intestines, right? And so that would show up as high. You have the mucus degradation index, is how much of the mucus that is protecting that gut cell lining is actually protective, right? How much of it is still there and how much of it is being degraded. Now this comes alongside Akkermansia muciniphila, which is one of the major producers of that mucus, right? Of that mucus index that we have here. If there are low levels of Akkermansia muciniphila, then in general, we might have low levels of mucus, and therefore your gut lining is now susceptible to infections. It's now susceptible to damage from the outside world. Next, we move into slow transit time. Now, this is a lot more common than people think, and it's one thing that I didn't think I'd have to talk about when we got into coaching, but the fact is that you have to be having at least one bowel movement every single day. If you are not, that is an issue. Beyond that, even if you do have one bowel movement per day or more, but your transit time is slow, that is a problem. I'm going to explain exactly how that's problematic. Now think of the moment that you take food into your mouth, you start to chew it, to the moment that it actually exits and goes into the toilet bowl, forms a bowel movement. You can actually quantify how much time it takes. Now, we can run through this in a different video, and I can actually leave it in the link below as to how to do a transit time test at home. It's very inexpensive and it's actually very easy to do. But in general, optimal time is between 14 to 24 hours. This has been clinically shown by Dr. Jason Horlak. He's a clinician and he's a PhD, and he suggests that this is the optimal time window that he's seen with his patients in improving some of the symptoms of gut dysfunction. Now, if it is slow, that means that you have not only potential components of food that are just getting lodged in there and staying in your intestines, but also very inflammatory bacterial toxins. Things like endotoxin and lipopolysaccharide can hang out in your intestines a lot longer than they should. And that means if they hang out in there, they can start to cross the gut lining and go into the bloodstream and trigger that whole cascade of inflammation we just spoke about. Problem number two is if your transit time is slow, some of that waste stays in there and it actually alkalizes the colon. Now, a lot of the sort of hippies out there in the health community, think that alkaline is better for everything. It is not, obviously. It is not in the case of stomach acid, and it is not in the case of your colon, because your colon should be slightly acidic. This is because your gut microbiome should, in healthy people, produce short-chain fatty acids. If they don't produce enough short-chain fatty acids, it is a recipe for disaster. This is where we get less intestinal lining integrity. That means you get more of that leaky gut, you get worse motility, that means less bowel movements, and you get more issues with the bloating, the constipation, all of those issues we talked about earlier. So if you're having slow transit time, that means you're going to be producing less of those beneficial short-chain fatty acids. You also will create an environment where it is very, very easy for the bad or pathogenic bacteria to overgrow. And that is where we get to gut dysbiosis. Now, some of the markers that you can look out for dysbiosis, this essentially means an imbalance of bacteria, the good and the bad, commensal and pathogenic. And so we get into some of the pathogenic bacteria here that we mainly look out for are Klebsiella, Citrobacter. Those are actually inflammatory and autoimmune related bacteria. That means that in some autoimmune conditions, they actually flag and show up as high as compared to normal healthy individuals. Now, we also look at things like proteobacteria because they have higher levels of lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin. It's kind of this outer shell, this outer layer of these bacteria that contain this highly, highly inflammatory component that, once again, if you have problem 1 and problem 2, and now you also have a lot of these bad bacteria, this is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for inflammation. That inflammation does not just stay in your gut, it can go everywhere in your body, including your brain, and can drive non-gut related symptoms like the brain fog and fatigue that we discussed earlier. We also want to look at commensals, so the healthy, good bacteria. These are things like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, as well as F. prausnitzii. These are all shown to be helpful in terms of producing those short-chain fatty acids, of healing and sealing the gut lining, and also crowding out the pathogenic bacteria. So now, the last one here is hexa-LPS index, so hexalipopolysaccharide index. This is essentially another way to just measure how much lipopolysaccharide is actually hanging around in your intestines. So we can see here, if we have more of the pathogenic bacteria, more of the proteobacteria, higher hexa-LPS index, and lower commensals, lower healthy, good bacteria, this is where we really define dysbiosis. This is a state in your microbiome, in your intestines, that is really not well suited to support good health. Now, if you want to understand exactly how to apply this to your own life, if you're dealing with gut dysfunction of any kind, or you want to optimize your health and your performance, then you can fill out the application below to book a 60-minute health strategy call with me. This isn't a sales call. We don't do any of the hard selling. Simply, this is a way for us to analyze and understand your goals alongside any relevant lab work that you bring to the call, and whether or not you decide to work together in a program with me one-on-one, you will still walk away with a plan that you can implement on your own. So the link to that will be in this description, and I hope you found this helpful.